Welcome to our webinar focused on backward design, approaches for the graduate profile. My name is Russell Carpenter, and I serve as Assistant Provost and Professor of English at Eastern Kentucky University. And I'm joined by several colleagues who will offer perspectives on backward design from Eastern Kentucky University, Elizabethtown Community and Technical College, and the University of Louisville. We're all very happy to have you joining our webinar today. In this webinar, we'll explore the key steps to backward design. We'll explain those very specifically and in ways that will be useful for you as you begin implementation and work through implementation at your institutions. We'll also identify the essential skills relevant to your programs and your disciplines and ways that you can use backward design to ensure that your courses are well aligned and teaching the essential skills that you are preparing for in your courses and in your programs. And from there, we'll walk you through several applications of backward design to ensure that alignment of outcomes, assessment of learning activities are supporting the teaching and learning for the 10 essential skills. So our agenda for this webinar is that we'll focus on the graduate profile. We'll introduce you to the graduate profile and ensure that you have the context that you need for understanding the 10 essential skills. From there, we'll provide the foundations of backward design for the graduate profile, and then approaches for applying backward design to curriculum planning that will ensure that you're prepared to incorporate the 10 essential skills. Then we'll move into several faculty case studies, which will showcase the ways that you can implement backward design to plan curriculum and to support the graduate profile work at your institutions. Pete, Aaron, Anastasia, and Jason will both share some perspectives to give you a sense of what backward design looks like when you are implementing the essential skills and, of course, designing courses to teach and support student learning of those essential skills. As a review, the Kentucky Graduate Profile is our state post-secondary learning framework. It's designed to support and align the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that students gain in college with the skills needed for success, not only in the workforce, but in life and in their higher education classrooms. You can learn more by using the QR code available here. The 10 essential skills are probably familiar to many of you. You've probably seen this graphic before, but it's important to reiterate how these 10 essential skills support students where they are as learners, and then moving forward throughout the curriculum, ways that they can hone and develop essential skills and practice those as they're working alongside our faculty, staff, and even other students. Through the graduate profile, we're really setting them up for success for the future in future courses as they navigate the curriculum in and across our higher education institutions and move into the workforce. As you're reviewing the essential skills, it's also important to consider the working definition of each essential skill. And we'll go into a little bit more depth about what that looks like and how that helps us to understand the place of backward design and the course design process as well. Understanding and working with each essential skill and also the definition ensures that we're communicating these essential skills in transparent and also meaningful ways to students. And that can support a successful backward design process as well. So with that, Pete Edwards will introduce us to the benefits of backward design for the graduate profile. Pete?
All right, thank you, Rusty. I'm Pete Edwards. I am an assistant professor in the School of Education at Eastern Kentucky University. And we're going to talk today a little bit about backwards design. A lot of backwards design ideas come from Wiggins and McTighe's Understanding by Design from 2005, which many people are familiar with. It's a foundational text. It's been around for a long time, but it's still very relevant to what we're doing, especially when we're incorporating the essential skills into our curriculum. Um, Backwards design really focuses on the things that we want students to learn. We're really looking for understanding as opposed to, I have to cover so many chapters of the textbook. It's not so much that, it's what do the students need to know at the end of this course. By doing this, it'll help you understand what are the really key concepts that you need students to understand. And it'll help you intentionally target the things that your students need to know, which in turn kind of defines what you need to be doing in your courses. Through this transparency, we're allowed to let students see what the purpose is, what we're doing in class, so that we're not, hiding our intent from them. And it really, we're trying to be instructionally self-aware. What are we doing? What do we need our students to do? How do those things fit together? And backwards design is really going to help you understand how all of those things fit together and provide a roadmap for designing those experiences for students. So you want to consider, what you're asking students to do in your course. What, how, and why they are learning in your course is really what we're looking for. When we think about teaching a course, we're thinking we want to start with those big ideas, right? What's the big point? What's the big idea? What are those core ideas that we need students to leave with? What is it going to help students understand and be able to do? Because eventually they are going to leave your institution. They need those skills to be out in the world and being, productive members of society. What is it? What are we relating this to? Ideally, we're not teaching in a bubble, right? We want these things to be relevant to student experience and the future experiences of students. And then the question that I'm sure, we've all heard from the time we were in kindergarten until now is, why do we have to learn this? Why is this important? Why? Well, when we're intentionally designing curriculum, when we're intentionally designing experiences for students academically, hopefully these questions will become much more evident. So, so when, and I'm going to preface this by saying you've probably all seen this in your classrooms. You've probably all seen this with your students. But when students understand what's happening in the classroom, when they understand what the goals are, they understand what they're expected to know, they understand how this relates to their future careers, they tend to be more interested in what's going on in the classroom. That engagement piece really comes into focus because they understand that these things are going to affect their lives outside of, the course and the program and the institution. They're going on to live these lives, and how do they affect that? Um, Ideally, it's going to bring in that metacognition piece where they're reflecting on what they know, reflecting on how they learn, and understanding what it is they're learning and how it is they're learning those ideas. And then transfer. Are they able to take these concepts that are in a course and then transfer them, to other courses in the program, and then eventually to course, or excuse me, to experiences outside of the classroom where they're learning to be, once again, in their field, producing and being a part of whatever it is they've studied at university level. They want to transfer those skills. And if they don't see these things, they're going to be disengaged. They're not going to be all in. But if we can, once again, if we can plan these experiences to have these, core principles in them, it's going to have better outcomes for students. All right. So when we talk about learning design, or excuse me, when we talk about backwards design, we are talking about working from the big picture to the small picture. And so the idea is we want to know what are the main objectives we want students to achieve before leaving our program, before leaving our course. What is it that they need to know? And that could be skills, it could be content. Um, Again, we want to consider that transfer. We want to consider, are we giving them skills that will then transfer to the next level, whatever that next level happens to be. Once we understand what we want students to know, then we start moving backwards. How are students able to demonstrate that understanding? And that's where we get into planning assessments. Now, assessments we often think of as tests, we think of them as essays, but a lot of assessments are going to be both high stakes, like those tests, but also maybe low stakes, which may be quizzes or even small assignments throughout the semester or course. This can be formative and summative assessment. We have those big summative assessments where we really do want to see what students know. But if you're also gaining student understanding through formative assessments throughout the course, that's a valid form of assessment as well. So you want to think, these are not just final exams, but a range of assessments that you're going to deploy throughout your course. Okay, so we've got the big ideas. We've got ways for students to demonstrate understanding. Then we finally work backwards to those learning activities. What is it that we are going to design in our courses that are going to allow us to deliver content, allow students experiences where they can practice those ideas, play with them, find space where they can grow intellectually and academically in whatever content you're teaching. Ideally, right, all of those activities are aligning with the assessments. All of those assessments are then aligning with the objectives at the end. And so we're intentionally thinking about all these things together. But if we work from big all the way back to small, it does help guide our planning for these lessons and assessments and objectives. So today, what we're looking to do is identify our desired results. So, for example, if my students need to understand, what communication looks like, what critical and creative thinking looks like in my course, what should the students be able to do with those skills? How is it that they will employ those skills once they leave my course, and move on to the next stage? I need to figure that out first. Once I have those ideas, I know, all right, my students need to communicate effectively. So for example, in the School of Education, our students need to communicate effectively to students. They need to understand that the ideas that they are presenting in class need to be readily absorbed by the students they're teaching, whatever level that is and whatever content that is. Same thing with critical and creative thinking. Our students need to understand that they have to find interesting ways to deliver that content. They have to find ways to, meet multiple students at multiple levels of mastery and find a way to make that curriculum relevant to students, in a strange mirroring sense, they're doing the same thing we're talking about today. So once we have identified those desired results, we are moving back to acceptable evidence, right? Designing rubrics to inform assessments. How do students demonstrate that learning? How do we know that they've learned it? And sometimes that may be more informal, formative assessments, discussions, check-ins, one-on-one instruction. And sometimes it's going to be much higher stakes with those summative assessments, those final exams, those large projects. Once we move back, we're going to plan those experiences, right? We talk about, that kind of hands-on learning, those activities that look more like real world simulations. We may build those you know, those workshops, right? Where we want people like we're in today, where we want people to understand we've got these essential skills. How do we work them into what we're doing in our curriculum already? And so when you think about this today, you really want to think, how is it that I'm taking these essential skills and marrying them with the content that we are already delivering in our courses and giving students the best experiences, the most effective ways to show that understanding that then lead to our larger outcomes at the end. Okay. So once again, that backwards design, we are looking to align those outcomes, the assessments and the essential skills, where we take the essential skills, right? And we are kind of embedding them in our coursework. Um, Again, most of you are doing these things already. Most of you, are having your students create these things and do these things in a way that you should, I would imagine, have multiple ways to incorporate them into your coursework so that the students are getting both the essential skills and your core content. And so I think I'm going to hand it back to Rusty, and he's going to start giving you these one-on-ones. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pete. That's an excellent foundation for understanding not only backward design, but I really appreciate how you're putting backward design into context for us and helping us understand that backward design is a very intentional process. Many many of us have a deep level of experience with course design. However, as we move forward in implementation of the graduate profile, we're thinking about what we're currently doing, the ways that we've designed our courses, maybe even historically over the past few years, how courses have evolved. And we're in the moment now where we're thinking very intentionally about how the 10 essential skills are incorporated or embedded into courses. And so, as opposed to thinking about the essential skill as being stacked, the backward design process is a very intentional method for ensuring that the essential skills are fully embedded into the course, and that the experiences that instructors are designing are transformational, are meaningful, and also transferable to students. So while it is an effort on the part of instructors to redesign a course and take a look at these aspects, these different aspects that connect of a course, this time is going to result in a very clear and deliberate, but ideally a transformational experience for our students. That is, the essential skill is not only taught and communicated to students and transparently available and accessible to students, but also reinforced through these different aspects of the course or these different phases of backward design. And this is an opportunity for our faculty as they are thinking about the essential skills to really reimagine courses as well, to build on where you've been, but to think very deeply about the essential skills. So building on everything that Pete has shared, we'll go into a little bit more detail on the first stage. And this is where, when employing the backward design approach, that first stage is going to be focused on identifying desired results. When I asked a group of faculty several weeks ago for their working definitions of backward design, one faculty member said, "Well, it's beginning with the end in mind," and there's a lot of truth to that. Right? There's a lot of truth to that in backward design. It ensures that we are starting in a place where we know where we're going to end, right? And we know and understand the outcomes at the course level. So for this first stage, you want to focus on the essential skill that your course is designed to teach. Many of you are at institutions right now that are going through various and important exercises. For example, curriculum mapping. You're identifying the essential skills, how they align with general education or maybe your first year experience. And as you're going through that process, you can draw from those resources to support your backward design process. And stage one really begins with a very clear understanding of that essential skill or the two essential skills that you're going to be focusing on. And then you want to consider the ways that you can link those to course or even program level learning outcomes. So as you're in this phase, I'd encourage you to consider a few questions. First, what should students know and be able to do as a result of taking this course? It's important to be able to articulate that, and you can even use the backward design planning tool here that is available through the QR code or the link to begin thinking about how you would answer that question. And if this is a course that you're very familiar with, and maybe you have taught this course for many times before, for many years, this is an opportunity to reimagine the course in light of embedding that essential skill. So you want to ensure that as you're answering this question, as you're thinking through this question, as you're having conversations with colleagues, that the skill is at the forefront. The essential skill is at the forefront. And then, of course, why does this essential skill matter in your discipline or even in your career path where you are teaching? Why does this matter? The graduate profile is an opportunity to show students not only the essential skills, but why they matter in their careers and in their lives. At the same time, you can think about why this essential skill matters to your discipline. How does it look in your discipline? How can you ensure that you're transferring this essential skill to the course level? This is going to become so important when you're teaching the course because you are going to be able to articulate that essential skill and ensure that the alignment of that essential skill and how it's built in or incorporated into the course is very clear to students as well. Stage 2 focuses on determining acceptable evidence. So in this phase, which is kind of in the middle of the process that Pete shared, consider how students can demonstrate they've developed this essential skill. How can they demonstrate that they've developed this essential skill? It's so important in this phase that as you're considering learning assessments and the options that you have available, that you approach this with kind of a new perspective. What are the opportunities for students to demonstrate that they've learned this essential skill? And ideally, we're moving beyond the surface level, right? Beyond memorizing the definition of an essential skill, but building on that and showing that they have not only learned the essential skill, but they have learned it deeply. And if they have learned that essential skill in deeply, they are able to transfer what they have learned to other courses, maybe other assignments within the course. They're able to display their capacity with that essential skill through conversations, or depending on the essential skill, collaboration and teamwork in the course itself. They're able to transfer that. They know what the skill is. They were able to articulate it. They're able to define it. And they're able to transfer it to different learning contexts. So this is an opportunity to reimagine that acceptable evidence, which is a really important phase of the process. You have several examples to work with here, but these can also be meaningful conversations that you have as you're thinking about how you can apply backward design at your institutions and specifically aligning acceptable evidence in meaningful ways for both your teaching and also to support student learning. Several examples might include group projects, for example, for collaboration and teamwork, or even infographics for the essential skill of communication. So that takes us to stage 3. And in stage 3, this is where you're going to be planning the learning experiences. And this is an exciting opportunity to think about the activities that scaffold the essential skills toward the assessment. We can also think in very clear and transparent ways so that these learning experiences are also accessible to students. That is, they're able to understand the essential skill, but from a faculty member's perspective, you've articulated the clear purpose and then the essential skill, and even taking that one step further, the knowledge that students will gain through this experience. Thinking about the task This could also be multiple tasks. And this is an opportunity to really look at what you're asking students to do to make sure that it aligns and supports the essential skill, the design of the course that you're planning, and then, of course, the criteria. So this is an opportunity to talk to students about what success looks like. If you have learned this essential skill and you've been successful in this assignment, what should it look like? What does it look like to you? What are the expectations for learning and the standards, not only in the course, but also in the assignments that support the course or the activities in the course? And what should that look like for students? We want to create experiences that are meaningful, but also highly engaging for students. They might come in with a high level of familiarity. Maybe they've heard about or had conversations about essential skills or even employability skills. So we can bring that to the forefront and make that available to students through this phase as well. And then, of course, ensuring that you have at least one assessment that supports the essential skill to allow students to demonstrate learning and ensuring that that is well aligned. Once you're at the assignment level, not only explaining and defining the essential skill from the outset, but reinforcing that essential skill, not only in different phases of the course, but in assignments as well, to ensure that students are coming back to this and the course and the assignments and the learning experiences are reinforcing how they have learned that essential skill. With that, we're going to move into our faculty case studies. So each faculty member is going to share a glimpse, a window into what backward design looks like within the disciplines and the courses that they're teaching. So I would suggest making some notes and drawing some parallels to the courses that you're planning and the courses that you are teaching as well. So Pete, would you like to get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rusty. So in the School of Education, I teach a lot of the foundation courses. So almost every student from, elementary all the way to high school will go through this course, and I teach the bulk of them. And so one of the assignments that was really important to us and needed to be redesigned was the philosophy of education. And I really approached this from a backwards design thinking because we needed to know what students could do. And so part of that, we had to first align with CAPE standards. We had to align with INTAS standards. And one of the really important things for us is, Kentucky standards for admission to the teacher education program. Or educator preparation program, excuse me. We call it the teacher education program at EKU. And so one of the requirements for admission into our teacher education program is students have to pass EDF 203, and the philosophy of education is a major assignment in there. And so it became, very important, and we wanted to think, well, what is it that students need to know? Now, this lines up with the essential skills of communication, with critical and creative thinking, and information literacy, using information to make decisions. And so with that in mind, I really needed to think about what it is students had to understand about this philosophy of education. So if we take a look at how I backwards designed it, it goes from the as we advance, Rusty. Sorry. There we are. Perfect. All right. So I wanted to think about this in a way that made sense both for the program and for students. The big goals were students needed to be able to clearly articulate a philosophy of education that was grounded in foundational theories. That was a very important part. I think most students coming in understood what they thought a classroom should look like. The problem was it wasn't related to any foundational theories. They thought, well, I think this is how it should go because these are the classes I liked, or this was my experience, or whatever it happened to be. But if we could get them to kind of relate their ideas to things that have happened throughout history in multiple locations and were backed by research, that was going to be much more valuable for them. The other intent here was they were building this philosophy of education that would follow them through the teacher education program. Now, I say follow, But as they go through the program, their thoughts on education will most likely evolve. They will change. But the idea is in EDF 203, we're establishing a baseline that was grounded in theory that allowed them to think about education moving forward, even if it had to be adjusted or modified with things that they learned, or, if they thought about changing, what level they wanted to teach or what subject, they at least had that beginning phase ready to go that would serve them moving through the program and then eventually moving on to their own classrooms as a teacher. So once that was established, there we go. Thank you. Once that was established, the assessment was clear because it was the philosophy of education essay. However, the planning of the rubric became essential. Their essays had to be grounded in theory, so that was non-negotiable. But in addition, they had to be personal. Every student was going to have to find an authentic voice for the way that they wanted to run their classrooms, and that would vary from student to student. As long as they were building it into that theory piece, it was going to be more effective for them because I wasn't telling them how to teach. They were telling me what they believed and how that related to the research. Once that was done, it made their hopefully it made their educational philosophy much more relevant to what they were doing because they wanted to kind of tie that to the level and content area they wanted to teach in. And then finally, that's actionable. What does that look like when they go on to the next courses in the teacher education program? How do they use that theory to kind of build on how they write lesson plans, how they design classroom management skills, things like that? But ideally, this baseline understanding of philosophy and education and the way they see that fitting together was going to serve them as they started building content in the teacher education program and then delivering that content as actual teachers. So that was the assessment piece. Once that was done, we then moved back to the learning activities. And in my classes, one of the important things we did was students built presentations on each of the 5 foundational education theories we learn about in EDF 203. They talked about, who developed these theories, where we saw them in history, tried to put them in context. Were these theories student-centered? Were they teacher-centered? What were the essential content markers? Did they believe in having more of a liberal arts view, or was it only, science, math, social studies, and English? And they started to present on those so that everyone, one, could break down those theories, but two, it was more accessible when students were presenting to students. Those then led to discussions in class where students compared these philosophies of education to not only their clinical observations that all of our 203 students observe at Model Laboratory School. So they had seen students and teachers in action, and so they started, making connections there as far as what were teachers doing in the classroom, how did that affect students, was it effective, was it not effective, could they have done it differently, in addition to their own personal experiences. One of the big issues in EDF 203 is students are typically freshmen or sophomores, and so they are very close to coming out of that K through 12 world. They are still thinking as students, and one of the goals in EDF 203 is just have them start to switch that viewpoint, that paradigm from being a student to considering education as a teacher, which is pretty significant and is a big step for them, especially early on. This philosophy of education paper helps them start to make that switch. The last piece of it is students were required to take their draft to the Noel Studio for revision. The Noel Studio is a program on campus that assists students with their writing, provides, editing services, gives them feedback, lets them get fresh eyes on their papers so that they're not the only ones looking at it. And again, these are typically freshmen in college and are maybe not used to writing at the university level. And so this helps them polish their work, helps them get it up to the degree it needs to be. So then again, they can demonstrate understanding through the assessment and then use this moving forward with the larger objectives into the program and then later into the world of working as a teacher. And so this is how I redesigned the philosophy of education paper. And it's produced strong results so far. So we're going to keep working with it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pete. And we'll transition to Erin. Erin?
Thank you, Rusty. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Faherty. I am an assistant professor of English at Elizabethtown Community and Technical College, and I really appreciate being here today with you guys. I'm just going to jump right in. So I redesigned an English 101 course, one of our gateway courses, of course, using backward design. It was a competency-based course, and so it's designed around 6 learning outcomes, each with their own module and summative assessment at the end. They are aligned with the essential skills of communication and critical thinking. And the course itself ends with a scenario-based capstone project at the very end of the semester. What I thought I would do is I've kind of pulled out some specific examples from this course for each stage of the backward design process that I used with it. And then I thought I would just kind of generally talk you through the process that I used during the course design process. And so, really, I start with the end in mind. I know Rusty said that earlier, and that was funny because that's how I think about it. I really ask myself, what do my students actually need to do by the end of the semester? And so I've pulled out an example of one of our learning outcomes for this course. This is learning outcome 4. As you can see, it's very broad. And because it's really a course level outcome, and so I spend a little more time in this stage of the backward design process because I would like to break that larger course outcome up into much smaller, very specific learning objectives. And again, you can see one of the examples from that relate to this particular outcome there in the objective 4.4. Now, the benefit to me following this process is really that it helps to clarify the outcomes for myself. And when it's clear to me as the instructor, then by extension, it becomes much more clear to my students down the road once they're actually taking this course. And so once I have those learning outcomes and objectives really defined, then I have to ask myself, what serves as really convincing evidence that the skill has been mastered? And typically for me, that is some sort of performance-based assessment, say thesis development or argument analysis. Then it's designing rubrics that are specifically geared towards that outcome or that skill or that specific learning objective that you've come up with. And so the example here is an assessment that was intentionally designed around the objective that I mentioned in step 1. So this particular assessment was really intentional in the way that it was set up to really meet that particular objective and then the larger learning outcome. And so when you actually do that, when you intentionally design your assessment around an objective, it has lots of benefits for students. So typically it will have a lot of clarity and transparency for them. Students know exactly what they're expected to do, and they know how success is defined. So what you will see with your students oftentimes is a shift in their perspective. So instead of them asking themselves, what does my professor want? They will start thinking, well, how do I demonstrate this skill? And some other benefits include better motivation. So students understand the purpose now in their assignments, and they see it less as busy work than perhaps they used to. And then also it encourages deeper learning with this process because they have to sort of demonstrate skill. It really calls on some higher order thinking, and which of course leads to better retention of what they're learning. Now, once you've designed those assessments, now you get to figure out what your students need to learn and practice. So a long time ago, I used to do this first. So this is really kind of turning everything I used to do on its head. But when you think about it in terms of what they need to learn and practice to be successful on that assessment, you've really created a structure that ties all of this together. So for me, usually I use some sort of Bloom's taxonomy with that process. I use a scaffolded practice approach. So my learning activities are usually low stakes and they're scaffolded as they go through that particular learning unit or module. And by doing so, this also has a lot of benefit for students because once again, they know exactly what they have to do, they know why they have to do it, and they can see how each activity actually builds them towards skill mastery. The end result for my students is really that they have a lot less confusion and a lot less cognitive overload. Now, doing this process for me has been really transformational for my teaching because my teaching is so much more intentional. So, when I have really spent the time identifying what I want my students to do and then designing assessments that let them prove that they can do it, and then tying those to these building blocks of activities that lead them to success, my course ends up being really much better aligned. And as we know, if we have course alignment, our students have clarity, they have better understanding, there's more engagement with the content, they have fewer questions about what they're learning. And for me, they have improved writing. So I guess the biggest lesson and the biggest learning that I took from using this process really is I stopped planning what kinds of essays I wanted my students to write and instead started thinking about defining the thinking and writing that I wanted my students to master.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you, Rusty.
All right. We'll move over to Anastasia and Jason for their perspectives on backward design.
Hi, yeah, I'm Anastasia Miller at the University of Louisville. Jason Imicus is with me. He's also at the University of Louisville. So we're going to talk about a specific process we've been doing for one of our bachelor's programs. It's the Healthcare Leadership Bachelor's degree, and we've been working for the last year and a half. We're going up for AUPHA. I keep calling it accreditation. They don't do that anymore. It's certification. And AUPHA is Association of Universities in Health Administration. So that is kind of the undergrad professional certifying accrediting body that shows there's a certain level of quality. And we really want to show that because we think that we offer that to our students. Well, as part of this process going up for it, we had to not only demonstrate that our curriculum was aligned with NICLS, which is the National Center for Healthcare Leadership Competencies. We also had to demonstrate that it's aligned with AUPHA content criteria. They have 18 content criteria. And we decided since we were doing that and had to document this and go through it, it was a good time since we are based in Kentucky to include Kentucky 10 in there because it's all very similar skill sets. It's ones that we expect students to get, if they want to be employed out in the field. So as part of this process, part of the packet, we have to demonstrate that we are intentionally teaching these competencies, that we are measuring them, and that the students are demonstrating mastery. Now, I'm glad somebody mentioned Bloom. We do go through the whole curriculum, and we're showing like the scaffolding, they progress and whatnot. I'm going to focus in on one specific course and one specific assignment in a course. But we have a crazy, if you could go back just for a second. We have a crazy, like a beautiful mind type board that shows how these all relate and whatnot. But basically, we did start with what were all the competencies that we had to make sure we demonstrated. And so I'm going to be talking about the healthcare human resources management course. And so within that, we picked out what were the NICLS competencies, what were the AUPHA criteria, and then what were the Kentucky essential skills that would align with that. If you could go forward now, please. Thank you, Rusty. So we drilled down, and within the Nichols competencies, we felt that one, we wanted them to do an integrated talent management strategy for their final project for this because it's an HR course. And I know that that's being replaced, but it's still used in the field. So we try to stay updated. But we identified within the Nichols competencies that there were some domains and some competencies specifically that we wanted to make sure that when they finished this course, they could demonstrate, such as systems thinking, performance measurement, collaboration. And that really tied in well. We then mapped to what Kentucky Essential 10 skills did we want: critical thinking, communication, professionalism. And then, like I said, we have our beautiful mind board, and we mapped it out to the assignments. And we said, in order to show these within an HR context, within a healthcare course, what type of products or deliverables are we looking for? And we agreed, like we matched it up, that we needed them to analyze some data. We needed them to come up with a strategic plan of some sort. We needed them to evaluate and critically think about some data. We kind of went through there. If you could go forward, please, Rusty. And so what we came up with was to show assessment as part of this integrated management strategy. We do have a rubric that ties very closely to these Kentucky 10, the Nichols, and the AUPHA. And we can show then that the students are critically thinking because they have to do a workforce gap analysis as part of this. We're showing that they're thinking strategically because they have to justify a long-term organizational alignment for a new hire for a clinical healthcare position. They have to write executive memos to show some communication and executive level writing. They have to show information management because they have to actually go get data from Bureau of Labor Statistics and some of these other places. It has to be feasible. It has to be very healthcare contextualized because it's a healthcare course, so that we feel that helps demonstrate professionalism. And we've operationalized it so that we can all agree and we can show this to our accreditors and whatnot, that this is how we're gathering this information. But it really was, we did start with what do we want them to show us at the end of this. It really was a backwards design of, we're not justifying they're doing this and it shows that. We really did intentionally go through and say, okay, we want them to show these skills. And so what type of artifact would help us produce that? And we've identified with the Bloom and the assessment level. And then we think it's great because it helps map out. We can show that all of our course objectives are met on this assignment. The Kentucky 10 that we wanted are met. The Nichols are met. The AUPHA is met. And that the students are actually producing pretty good work that could be used in a workplace.
All right. Thank you, Anastasia. We'll now move into several applications of the backward design process specifically for the Kentucky graduate profile. So Pete, it's back to you.
Thanks again, Rusty. So when you start thinking about incorporating the graduate profile into your content, you really, once again, you want to start with what do you want your students to know at the end? What essential skills are going to be, how are your students going to understand these essential skills, at the end of your course, at the end of your program, wherever it happens to be. And you want to consider, what does mastery look like? And there are, really helpful levels of mastery grid that you can refer to. But you want to think, I have this content, I have these essential skills. what does success from our students look like at the very end? And that's really where you want to start when you start building, this curriculum, when you start incorporating these essential skills into what you are doing. And so then you're going to go to that assessment piece, right? You want authentic assessment. You want things that your students are going to be able to transfer into, the next level. You want things that are going to be useful to your students and that they are going to see as useful. Like, I believe Erin talked about her students not seeing it as busy work. I think that's a great way to put it. It really does. We really do want these to be, authentic and relevant assessments that allow students to demonstrate understanding, right? But also looks like the kind of assessment, the kind of problems, the kind of challenges that they will see in the real world or at the next level in your program, whatever that happens to be and wherever you sit, in that line of courses. Then once we have that, we're going to move back to those experiences. How are we designing experiences that serve those assessments, which in turn serve those overall outcomes? We want to think mapping those essential skills over the activities in your class that combine the two so that your students are putting these together in an intuitive way. And this really requires you to be intentional. Are you clearly taking those skills and putting them in the best way with your content to then serve the other steps in that backwards design? And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Rusty. He's going to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. That really helps us to understand how to apply these ideas as we're redesigning or designing courses to integrate the 10 essential skills of the graduate profile. We have a large number of resources available to support incorporation of backward design, and many of these resources are readily applicable to the work that you'll be doing with colleagues at your institutions. So some of these prompt reflection that will encourage you to think a little bit more about backward design, the application, your level of familiarity, to plan activities, especially as you are continuing conversations at your institutions or within graduate profile teams, and then how to align the activities as well. The graduate profile and CPE have also designed some impressive resources. You have the Resource Center here, which you can access via the QR code along with the toolkit. These are evolving resources. We have colleagues around the state who are contributing to these so that we are all able to not only share, but also benefit from resources that can help us ensure that the graduate profile work that we are doing as we are scaling the graduate profile across departments and across programs, that we have these resources available to ensure that those processes are successful across institutions as well. We've designed a professional development verification module, which you can access via the bit.ly link or the QR code. I'll leave this up for a little bit here, but this will give you verification that you've participated in the backward design webinar. It provides documentation of your participation, and you can follow the QR code to access, or the URL to access, several questions. These questions prompts reflection and will help you think a little bit more about the next steps in the process and how you can apply some of these ideas. You'll be able to download a completion certificate, but keep in mind that you can also go back and access and download previous certificates as well if you'd like to incorporate them into your portfolios or annual review processes. And of course, the verification modules do not expire, so you can complete these at any time. But I would encourage you to go ahead and do that if you want to get the bit.ly link and complete that later. It's also very helpful for us to see how you're using the content and how you are thinking about it in the work that you are doing. Finally, if you are interested in looking into any of the research or the references that we have shared, you have those available here. I would recommend, and we have been sharing this resource at EKU, the book by Wiggins and McTighe, Understanding by Design, goes into a lot of the background that Pete and our colleagues from across Kentucky have shared with you. If you'd like to do that closer look into backward design, I'd strongly recommend that resource as well. With that, I'd like to thank Aaron and Pete and Jason and Anastasia for sharing their perspectives as part of our backward design webinar. We hope that you have found the webinar and the resources and the recommendations useful as you continue your work with the graduate profile. Thanks so much for joining our webinar. Bye, everyone.